Every year, the most powerful people on Earth vanish behind closed doors. No press, no cameras, no minutes, no public record of any kind. And when they emerge, the world quietly shifts. This April, just weeks ago, it happened again. The 72nd Bilderberg Meeting, held from April 9th to 12th, 2026, at the Salamander Hotel in Washington, D.C., one of the most fortified private gatherings in modern history. 128 participants from 23 countries, sealed rooms. No official press coverage on the ground. Welcome to the Business Architect. Today we're pulling back the curtain on what just happened. Who was in that room? What they were discussing? Which industries and countries will feel it first? And what it means for ordinary people like you and me. Let's start with what Bilderberg actually is, because this is where most people get it wrong. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is a documented, verified, officially published annual conference, and it has been running since 1954. It was founded by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, with the original stated goal of fostering dialogue between Europe and North America during the Cold War. Today, its official website publishes the list of participants and agenda topics each year. But here is the critical detail. Every single discussion happens under the Chatham House Rule. The Chatham House Rule means participants are free to use the information they receive, but they are forbidden from ever revealing who said what, or even confirming who was in the room. No votes are taken. No formal resolutions are passed. No official communique is ever published. On the surface, it looks like a polite talk shop, but a peer-reviewed study published in the journal International Politics found that of 133 politicians who attended Bilderberg conferences between 1990 and 2019, 42 of them later became prime ministers, presidents, or heads of major international organizations. The list includes Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Angela Merkel, Olaf Scholz, Pedro Sanchez, Paul Martin, and Stephen Harper. Emmanuel Macron attended the 2014 Bilderberg meeting in Copenhagen, 3 years before he became president of France. Ursula von der Leyen attended 4 Bilderberg conferences before she was selected to lead the European Commission in 2019, despite not being the originally expected candidate. As Politico wrote at the time, her extensive international network, built through forums exactly like Bilderberg, was the decisive factor in winning her the top job. This is not conspiracy. This is documented pattern. Bilderberg doesn't make decisions. It shapes the people who do. Now let's look at who actually sat in that room in April 2026, because the attendee list alone tells a story. According to the official participant list published on bilderbergmeetings.org, the 129 guests included 50 business executives, 26 politicians, 2 financiers, 12 editors and journalists, and 4 academics. On the corporate side, Albert Bourla, chairman and CEO of Pfizer, was present, the same Pfizer that generated over $100 billion in COVID-19 vaccine revenues. Roland Busch, president and CEO of Siemens AG, one of Germany's most powerful industrial conglomerates with $77 billion in annual revenues, attended. Valerie Bodson, CEO of Amundi, Europe's largest asset manager, overseeing nearly $2.2 trillion in assets, was in the room. Nadia Calvino, president of the European Investment Bank, the world's largest multilateral lender, attended. On the government side, Douglas Burgum, the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, attended, a man who sold his software company to Microsoft and built multiple tech ventures before entering government. Daniel P. Driscoll, the U.S. Secretary of the Army, was also present, placing American military leadership in direct proximity to Europe's top defense industrialists. Murray Auchincloss, former CEO of BP, the British oil giant with operations in over 70 countries, was there. From the world of artificial intelligence, Alex Karp, CEO of Palantir Technologies, seated by the CIA's venture arm In-Q-Tel, and now deeply embedded in the U.S. Department of Defense, Homeland Security, and the immigration enforcement apparatus, was at the table. Brian Schimpf, CEO of Anduril Industries, a defense technology startup building autonomous weapon systems and recently valued at $61 billion, was also present. Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google and former chair of the Pentagon's Defense Innovation Board, attended, representing the intersection of big tech and military strategy. Jack Clark, co-founder of Anthropic, one of the world's leading AI safety companies, was in the room. And from finance, Henry R. Kravis, the legendary private equity titan and co-founder of KKR, one of the most powerful buyout firms in history, attended. Now here is what almost nobody talked about. The media. Bloomberg's editor-in-chief John Micklethwaite attended. CNN anchor Fareed Zakaria attended. Financial Times commentator Gideon Rachman attended. Anne Applebaum of The Atlantic attended. The very journalists who shape how billions of people understand global events attended a private, secret conference with the world's most powerful executives and politicians. And per the Chatham House rule, they cannot tell you what was said or who said it. Now you understand why major media produced zero on-the-ground coverage of this event. Now let's decode the official 2026 agenda. Because when you understand who is in the room and what they collectively control, these 15 agenda topics stop being abstract headlines. The 15 officially published topics were AI, Arctic security, China, digital finance, energy diversification, Europe, global trade, the Middle East, Russia, transatlantic defense, industrial relationship, Ukraine, USA, future of warfare, the West, and the future of democracy itself. Let's break down the 5 that carry the heaviest economic and geopolitical weight. Artificial intelligence. In that room were the CEO of Palantir, the co-founder of Anthropic, executives from Microsoft and Meta's AI division, and Eric Schmidt, who previously shaped U.S. military AI strategy from the Pentagon's advisory board. These are not people discussing AI in theory. These are the architects of how AI will be embedded into defense, surveillance, finance, and governance simultaneously. The growing role of AI in autonomous weapons and drone systems was reportedly a central focus of discussions on the future of warfare agenda item. For context, Palantir already holds contracts across the DoD, DHS, and ICE. Anduril is building autonomous military drones. The decisions made about AI governance at forums like this will determine whether those systems face public oversight or operate beyond it. The transatlantic defense-industrial relationship. This is one of the most consequential agenda items in modern Bilderberg history, because it comes at a moment when NATO allies are under pressure to dramatically increase defense spending. Also present in the room, Andrius Kubilius, the EU Commissioner for Defense and Space, the man tasked with building Europe's first-ever joint defense industrial policy, and Marcus Laubenthal, General and Chief of Staff at Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, the operational nerve center of NATO. When the CEO of a $61 billion autonomous weapons company, a NATO general, an EU defense commissioner, and a U.S. Army secretary all sit in the same private room. The outputs of that conversation will eventually become defense procurement decisions worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Countries and companies that align with the emerging transatlantic defense framework will win contracts. Those outside it will not. Digital finance. Patrick Collison, CEO of Stripe, one of the world's most powerful payments infrastructure companies, was in the room alongside the president of the European Investment Bank and the governor of the Bank of Spain. The intersection of digital payment infrastructure and public financial institutions, discussed in private, has enormous implications. Central bank digital currencies are currently being piloted in over 130 countries. The architecture of who controls the rails of digital money and on what terms is one of the most consequential financial decisions of this decade. And it is being discussed at forums exactly like this one. Energy diversification. Murray Auchincloss of BP, Catherine McGregor, CEO of Engie, one of Europe's largest energy utilities, and Fatih Birol, the executive director of the International Energy Agency, were all present. The agenda item on energy diversification comes at a moment of historic realignment in global energy markets, as Europe desperately accelerates its shift away from Russian gas, and as the United States is leveraging its LNG exports as a geopolitical tool. The informal consensus built in private forums like Bilderberg determines which energy corridors get investment, which countries get prioritized, and which technologies, nuclear, hydrogen, LNG, receive policy backing. Your energy bill, 5 years from now, will partly reflect decisions that were shaped in rooms like this. Global trade in China. Robert Lighthizer, the former U.S. trade representative who designed the Trump-era tariff war against China, attended Bilderberg 2026. He sat in the same private room as the top executives of Siemens, Amundi, Axel Johnson, Axel Springer, and the president of the European Investment Bank. The informal alignment on how the West positions itself against China in semiconductors, critical minerals, electric vehicles, and trade rules will determine which industries get protected and which gets sacrificed in the negotiation. Every supply chain manager in Asia, every manufacturer in Southeast Asia, building for Western markets, every rare earth mining executive in Africa, their economic fate is shaped by the informal consensus this room produces. Now let's get specific about who wins and who loses from the patterns we can already see emerging from this meeting. Defense technology companies are the clearest winners, with the CEOs of Palantir and Anduril in the room alongside NATO generals and the U.S. Army Secretary. The political alignment for massively expanded defense AI contracts is being built real-time. Anduril alone recently raised $5 billion at a $61 billion valuation, and that was before this meeting. European defense contractors, companies like Safran, MBDA, Rheinmetall, and BAE Systems, stand to benefit enormously as the EU builds its own joint defense procurement framework. The EU Commissioner for Defense was in that room. The conversation about where to spend Europe's rapidly growing defense budgets was happening at this very meeting. LNG exporters and alternative energy infrastructure developers are another major beneficiary, with the former CEO of BP, the CEO of Engie, and the head of the IEA in the room. The informal policy push toward non-Russian energy infrastructure, LNG terminals, nuclear revival, hydrogen corridors, was almost certainly reinforced. Private equity firms with portfolios in defense, AI, and energy, like KKR, whose co-founder Henry Kravis attended, are uniquely positioned to capitalize on every single one of these trends simultaneously. Digital payment infrastructure companies, particularly those that can serve both public and private sector clients as central bank digital currency architecture, is being built, stand to win contracts worth trillions. Now for the losers, the sectors and regions left outside the room. Emerging market economies dependent on Chinese manufacturing corridors face headwinds as the Bilderberg-aligned Western elite consensus increasingly treats China as an adversary rather than a partner. Traditional European gas utilities and pipeline operators face accelerating obsolescence as the energy diversification agenda accelerates the move away from Russian infrastructure. Small and medium-sized tech companies that cannot compete for classified defense AI contracts, the very space that Palantir and Anduril dominate, will be structurally excluded from the most lucrative tier of the coming AI economy. And any financial infrastructure that operates outside the emerging Western digital finance architecture, including certain crypto ecosystems, faces increasing regulatory pressures shaped in forms exactly like this one, Now let's get personal, because what is decided in private rooms by 128 people directly shapes the economic reality of billions. First, your job and your wage. Research from the Economic Policy Institute has documented that decades of wage stagnation for ordinary workers has been driven in significant part by coordinated policy choices on labor law, tax structures, and trade deals, made by exactly the kind of elite networks that Bilderberg represents. The acceleration of AI discussed at this meeting will reshape entire job categories, not in 5 years, but in 2. The workers most exposed are those in middle-skill jobs: financial analysis, basic coding, content moderation, document processing, and customer service. Precisely the roles that AI platforms from the companies represented in that room are already replacing. Second, your energy costs. The energy diversification agenda being shaped at meetings like this one has a direct consumer price impact. Transitioning from pipeline Russian gas to LNG shipped across oceans is structurally more expensive. European consumers have already absorbed this. Energy bills across the EU have risen dramatically since 2022 and have not returned to pre-war levels. Third, your financial sovereignty. The digital finance agenda item, discussed by payment infrastructure executives and central bankers in private, is directly connected to the global push for programmable central bank digital currencies. Unlike cash, a programmable CBDC can theoretically be designed with spending restrictions, expiry dates, or geographic limits, features that have been openly discussed by central banks in multiple countries. Whether you consider that a threat or a feature, the architecture of the system you will be living inside is being negotiated right now, and it is not being negotiated in public. Fourth, war and your taxes. NATO members have been under growing pressure to raise defense spending to at least 2% of GDP, and many are now being pushed toward 3% or higher. The transatlantic defense-industrial relationship discussed at Bilderberg 2026 is the policy framework that will drive those decisions. Higher defense spending must come from somewhere. Cuts to social services, pension systems, healthcare, or education, or it comes from higher taxes on ordinary citizens. The people in that room in Washington, D.C. will not be the ones making those trade-offs. You will. Now let me be precise about something, because responsible analysis matters here. Bilderberg does not make binding decisions. It takes no votes. It passes no laws. It issues no mandates. The official Bilderberg website states explicitly, there is no detailed agenda, no resolutions are proposed, no votes are taken, and no policy statements are issued. And yet, as Princeton researcher Martin Gollins and Northwestern professor Benjamin Page demonstrated in their landmark 2014 study, when economic elites and organized groups representing business interests push for policy outcomes, those outcomes are implemented at far higher rates than when average citizens prefer them. The mechanism doesn't require secret orders. It operates through aligned thinking, shared mental models about what is normal, what is inevitable, and what is politically possible. As Czech researcher Lucas Cantor noted in his peer-reviewed analysis published in Georgetown's Journal of International Affairs, Bilderberg sustains a cohesive elite worldview, and influence does not require formal decisions. When the CEO of Pfizer and the Secretary of the U.S. Army and the President of the European Investment Bank and the CEO of Palantir all spend 4 days exchanging ideas privately, the alignment that emerges shapes what each of them considers realistic when they return to their desks on Monday. That is the power of Bilderberg. It is not a shadow government. It is something arguably more effective, a consensus factory. History gives us a useful lens. Bilderberg meetings in the early 1990s featured participants who then shaped the post-Cold War global order, the expansion of NATO, the creation of the EU single market, and the rise of globalized finance. Bill Clinton attended the 1991 Bilderberg meeting in Baden-Baden as governor of Arkansas, 1 year before he became president of the United States. The 2002 meeting in Chantilly was attended by participants who later shaped the geopolitical framing of the Iraq War and the post-9/11 surveillance architecture. And the 2023 Bilderberg meeting in Lisbon, which focused heavily on AI and Ukraine, was followed within weeks by significant escalations in both Western AI regulation frameworks and NATO commitments to Ukraine. Correlation is not causation, but correlation this consistent across this many decades is not nothing. The 2026 meeting's extraordinary early timing, April instead of the usual June, suggests a sense of urgency the organizers themselves felt, but could not publicly name. Here is the question that should be asked more loudly in public discourse. In a democracy, the people who hold public power, ministers, secretaries, central bank governors, are accountable to the public they serve. But when those same officials attend a private meeting under a secrecy rule, alongside the CEOs of weapons companies, intelligence-linked technology firms, and the world's largest asset managers, the democratic circuit is broken. The Dr. Rath Health Foundation's analysis of Bilderberg 2026 put it plainly. When key figures from government, business, and security sectors meet in secret, It creates a parallel sphere of influence that operates beyond the safeguards of democratic accountability. The question is not whether these conversations should happen. Complex global problems require informal dialogue. The question is why the public, whose lives are shaped by these conversations, is structurally excluded from them. So where does this leave you? The 72nd Bilderberg meeting happened. It is documented. The participants are named. The agenda is published. What was said remains secret, but who said it and who they represent and what they collectively control tells us more than enough. The industries that will be shaped: defense technology, AI infrastructure, energy, digital finance, and global trade. The countries that will feel it most: the NATO alliance, Europe's industrial economies, emerging markets in Asia and Africa caught between Western and Chinese spheres, and the people who will live with the outcomes: everyone whose job, energy bill, savings, and security is downstream of decisions made in rooms they are never invited into. This is what the business architect is built for: not conspiracy, but clarity, connecting the documented dots of hidden money and power so you can see the architecture before it is built around you. If you want to continue this conversation, reach me on Signal at thebusinessarchitect123.43. Sources for every claim in this video are linked in the description. From Bilderbergmeetings.org, Wikipedia's verified conference page, Georgetown Journal of International Affairs, the International Politics Peer-Reviewed Study, the Economic Policy Institute, and others. See you in the next one.